The woman standing on the porch of the general store in Raton, New Mexico Territory, had a Winchester rifle balanced across her forearm like she was born with it there. And every man who passed gave her a wide berth, not out of fear, but out of respect that bordered on reverence. Florence Vaughn had inherited her father's ranch 3 years ago, when consumption took him in the winter of 1881, and she had run it alone ever since, turning away every suitor who came calling with proposals of marriage and promises to take the burden of land management off her delicate shoulders. She was 24 now, in this summer of 1884, and the good people of Raton had finally stopped trying to marry her off to eligible bachelors who rode through town. Her reputation preceded her. She could rope a steer faster than most men, shoot straighter than the sheriff, and negotiate cattle prices with such fierce intelligence that buyers from as far as Santa Fe knew better than to try to cheat her. The sun beat down on the dusty Main Street as Florence waited for the merchant to finish loading her supplies onto the wagon. She had driven into town before dawn, wanting to complete her business and return to the ranch before the afternoon heat became unbearable. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her clothing was sensible. A split riding skirt and a cotton shirt that had seen better days but was clean and mended with careful stitches. She carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. A commotion down the street caught her attention. 3 cowboys were dismounting outside the saloon, their horses lathered and exhausted. Florence recognized the brands on the animals. They belonged to the Double H Ranch, a spread about 15 miles north that had recently been purchased by some wealthy family from back east. She had heard the new owner was sending his son to run the operation, though she had not yet met the man. Ranch owners came and went. What mattered was whether they understood the land and respected it. One of the cowboys separated from the group and started walking toward the general store. Florence studied him with the same attention she gave to everything in her world. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. His clothing marked him as someone who actually worked rather than just supervised. His boots were worn, his denims faded, and his hands, even from a distance, showed the calluses of a man who knew rope work. He moved with an easy grace that suggested strength held in reserve. He tipped his hat as he approached, his eyes meeting hers directly. They were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sage in the early morning light. "Madam," he said, his voice a warm baritone with the hint of an accent she could not quite place. "I am Vincent Hollis. I have just taken over management of the Double H." Florence shifted the rifle slightly. "Florence Vaughn, I own the Flying V to your south." "I know," he said simply. "Your reputation extends well beyond Raton. I was hoping we might discuss water rights at some point. The creek that runs through both our properties." "The creek originates on my land," Florence said, her voice pleasant but firm. "Your access is by courtesy, as it was with the previous owner. As long as that is understood, we will have no problems." Most men would have bristled at such directness from a woman. Vincent Hollis simply nodded. "That is more than fair. I appreciate your clarity. Too many people dance around the truth. I find dancing wastes time better spent on useful work." Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "I suspect we will get along well, Miss Vaughn." "It is Miss Vaughn," she confirmed, "and likely to remain so." "I heard that as well," he said. "Half the men I have hired have stories about the woman who turned down marriage proposals from the richest ranchers in 3 territories. Then they should also have told you I am not interested in changing that situation." They did. He shifted his weight, and Florence noticed he was careful to keep his distance, respecting her space. What they could not tell me was why you would choose such a difficult path. Running a ranch alone is hard enough for a man. For a woman, it must be nearly impossible. Florence felt the familiar spark of irritation that always came with such comments, but she kept her voice level. It is difficult for anyone who does it. Gender has nothing to do with competence. My father taught me everything he knew before he died. I am as capable as any man in this territory of managing my land. I did not mean to suggest otherwise, Vincent said quickly. I apologize if it sounded that way. I have watched you with the merchant these past minutes, and the way he defers to your judgment on quality and price. It is clear you command respect. Florence studied him more carefully. Most men offered empty flattery or thinly veiled condescension. This cowboy seemed genuine in his observation. Why does it matter to you? Because I prefer to know my neighbors, Miss Vaughn, and because I admire competence wherever I find it. He paused. And because the first rule my father taught me about ranching was to learn from those who know the land better than you do. You have been working this territory for years. I am new here. It would be foolish of me not to listen when you speak. Before Florence could respond, the merchant emerged from the store with the last of her supplies. That is everything, Miss Vaughn. Charged to your account as usual. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Florence turned back to Vincent. Good day, Mr. Hollis. Send word if you need to discuss the water situation formally. I will. Good day, Miss Vaughn. He stepped back to let her pass, and Florence was aware of his gaze following her as she climbed onto the wagon seat and gathered the reins. She did not look back as she drove the team out of town, but she thought about those gray-green eyes for longer than she cared to admit. The Flying V Ranch sat in a valley between two ridges, with the creek Vincent had mentioned running through the eastern pasture. Florence's father had chosen the location well. There was good grass, reliable water, and natural windbreaks that made the harsh winters slightly more bearable. The house was small but solidly built, 2 rooms with a loft and a stone fireplace that her grandfather had constructed when he first claimed the land. Florence had added a proper barn and a series of corrals in the years since taking over, using money saved from successful cattle drives. She had 2 permanent hands who lived in the bunkhouse. Charlie was in his 50s, a former trail boss who had been injured in a stampede and could no longer handle the long drives, but was worth his weight in gold for his knowledge of cattle and horses. Maria was a widow whose husband had worked for Florence's father. She handled the cooking and helped with the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. Between the 3 of them, they hired extra hands during branding season and cattle drives, but the core work was managed by this small, fiercely loyal group. Charlie came out to help unload the wagon when Florence pulled into the yard. How was town? Busy, Florence said, handing down a sack of flour. I met the new owner of the Double H. That Vincent Hollis fellow. Charlie's weathered face creased with interest. What is he like? Time will tell, Florence said carefully. He seemed reasonable, asked about the creek. That could mean trouble. Or it could mean he is smart enough to establish boundaries early. Florence jumped down from the wagon. Either way, we will watch and see. They worked in companionable silence, carrying supplies into the house and the barn. Florence had learned early that Charlie respected her more when she worked alongside him, rather than directing from a distance. It was one of many small lessons in managing men that her father had never explicitly taught, but that she had learned through trial and error. That evening, after supper, Florence sat on her porch and watched the sun set behind the western ridge. This was her favorite time of day, when the heat finally broke and the land seemed to breathe again. She could hear the cattle settling in the pastures, the occasional whinny from the horses in the corral, the distant yip of coyotes beginning their nightly chorus. She thought about Vincent Hollis and his direct way of speaking. She thought about how he had not tried to charm her or diminish her. She thought about his hands, which had looked capable, and his eyes, which had looked honest. Then she pushed those thoughts aside firmly. She had learned long ago that admiring a man was a short road to losing herself. Every marriage proposal she had received had come with the same unspoken expectation that she would step back, let the man take over, become something smaller than she was. She would not do it. She could not do it and still recognize herself. Better to be alone and whole than partnered and diminished. The summer progressed, and Florence found herself encountering Vincent Hollis more often than pure chance would suggest. He appeared at the weekly market in Raton on the same days she did business. He attended the church social in August, despite being new to the community, and made a point of speaking with her about the drought conditions affecting the territory. He was always respectful, always professional, never crossing the invisible lines she maintained around herself. But there was something in the way he looked at her, a warmth that went beyond neighborly courtesy. Florence was not naive. She recognized attraction when she saw it. What surprised her was her own response, the way her pulse quickened when she saw him riding across his property, the way she found herself looking for him at community gatherings. She told herself it meant nothing. Attraction was a biological response, nothing more. It did not change her fundamental beliefs about marriage and independence. It did not alter her determination to remain her own woman. In September, when the first cold snap hit early and hard, several of Florence's cattle broke through a fence and wandered onto Double H land. She discovered it at dawn, cursing her own negligence for not reinforcing that section of fence before winter. She saddled her best horse and rode out immediately, hoping to round up the strays before they caused problems. She found them grazing peacefully in a meadow on Vincent's property, and she found Vincent already there, sitting on his horse and watching the cattle with an expression of patient amusement. "I believe these ladies belong to you," he said as Florence approached. "I recognized your brand." "I apologize," Florence said stiffly. "I should have reinforced that fence last week. I will get them back to my property immediately." "No hurry," Vincent said. "They are not causing any trouble, but I could help you get them home faster if you would accept the assistance." Florence's first instinct was to refuse. She had handled situations like this dozens of times alone, but the practical part of her mind pointed out that accepting help was simply efficient, not a sign of weakness. "I would appreciate that," she said. They worked together smoothly, Vincent anticipating her moves without needing instruction, both of them reading the cattle and each other with the kind of unspoken communication that came from genuine skill. Within an hour they had the strays back on Flying V land and were examining the broken fence. "This whole section needs replacing," Vincent observed. "The wood is rotted through." "I know. It has been on my list, but I have been focused on preparing the winter hay." Florence studied the fence with frustration. "I will get to it next week." "I have extra lumber from a project we finished last month," Vincent said. "And I am fairly good with fence construction. If you would not mind the company, I could help you replace this section tomorrow." Florence looked at him sharply. "Why would you do that? Because it is the neighborly thing to do. Men do not usually offer to help me without expecting something in return." Vincent's expression sobered. "What would I expect? What could you possibly owe me for a few hours of labor and some spare wood? That is what I am trying to determine." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on hers. "Miss Vaughn, I will be honest with you. I admire you. I admire your strength, your competence, your refusal to be anything less than who you are. But I have no designs on your independence. If you tell me you do not want help, I will respect that. If you accept the help, I will ask for nothing in return except perhaps your conversation, which I have found I enjoy more than I expected to." Florence felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the armor she had so carefully constructed. "Just conversation." "Just conversation," he confirmed. "I am not trying to court you, Miss Vaughn, though I would be lying if I said I did not think about it. But I have heard enough about you to know that you have no interest in marriage, and I respect that choice even if I do not fully understand it." "You do not understand why a woman would not want to marry. I do not understand why you believe marriage would require you to give up who you are," Vincent said carefully. "But then, I suspect my view of marriage is different from what you have been offered." "How so?" He leaned against the fence post, his eyes distant. "My parents have been partners for 30 years, true partners. My mother runs the business side of our family ranch in Colorado. My father handles the livestock. They make decisions together, argue frequently, and respect each other completely. Neither one is diminished by the other. They are stronger together than they would be apart." "That is rare," Florence said quietly. "I know. But it is what I saw growing up, and it is the only kind of marriage I would want." He straightened. "Which is why I am not courting you, Miss Vaughn. I understand you do not want that kind of partnership, rare or otherwise, but I can still appreciate your strength and offer help when I have it to give." Florence studied his face, looking for deception or hidden agenda. She found only sincerity. "Tomorrow morning, then. Come at dawn. I will have coffee ready." The smile that crossed his face was like sunrise. "I will be here." He was true to his word, arriving just as the eastern sky was beginning to lighten, a wagon full of lumber behind his horse. Florence had coffee waiting, and Maria had insisted on making extra biscuits, though Florence had tried to explain this was not a social call. They worked through the morning, the physical labor made easier by conversation that ranged from practical matters of ranch management to stories of their respective childhoods. Florence learned that Vincent was 26, that he had grown up working his family's ranch, and that he had come to New Mexico territory specifically to build something of his own rather than simply inheriting his father's operation. "I needed to prove I could do it myself," he explained as they positioned another fence post. "My father understood. He did the same thing when he was my age." "That is why you understand," Florence said, "why you do not question my need to run my own ranch." "We are not so different, you and I," Vincent agreed. "We both need to know our own strength." By afternoon, the fence was complete, sturdy and straight. Florence stood back and examined their work with satisfaction. "You do good work, Mr. Hollis." "Vincent," he corrected. "I think we are past formalities, are we not, Florence?" she offered in return. "Florence." He said her name carefully, as if testing the shape of it. "Thank you for the day. I enjoyed it. Despite the work, because of it, there is satisfaction in building something solid." He gathered his tools and loaded them into the wagon. "If you ever need help again, or if you just want someone to talk to who understands what it means to run a ranch, you know where to find me." After he left, Maria came out to the porch where Florence was watching the wagon disappear down the road. "That is a good man. He seems to be. He looks at you like you are the sunrise." Florence glanced at her sharply. "Maria." "I am just saying what I see, little one." Maria had known Florence since birth and took certain liberties. "And I see you look back. Looking and doing are different things." "Maybe they do not have to be." Florence shook her head. "I have worked too hard to build this life to risk it on maybes." But over the following weeks, she found herself thinking about Vincent more than was comfortable. He appeared in her thoughts at odd moments. When she was working with the horses, she wondered what he would think of her training methods. When she was negotiating prices in town, she found herself wanting to tell him about the victories and frustrations. When she sat on her porch in the evenings, she noticed the silence more acutely than she had before. In October, when roundup season began, Vincent rode over one morning with a proposal. "I am short-handed for the gather," he said without preamble. "Two of my men quit last week to try their luck in the gold fields. I was wondering if we might combine our operations this season. Pool our hands, work both ranches together, split the costs and the work equally." Florence considered the offer carefully. It made practical sense. Roundup was always the most labor-intensive time of year, and finding good temporary hands was becoming increasingly difficult as men chased various booms across the West. But working closely with Vincent for weeks would mean constant proximity, constant temptation to let down her guard. "Equal partnership," she clarified. "Equal say in decisions." "Completely equal," Vincent confirmed. "Your land, your cattle, your choices, same for me. We would just be sharing labor and resources." "Then I accept." The roundup was hard work from dawn until well past dark, but it was also exhilarating. Florence and Vincent worked as co-leaders, directing the combined crew of 8 hands with a coordination that seemed almost instinctive. They could read each other's intentions with a glance, anticipate each other's needs, support each other's decisions without needing discussion. The men responded well to the arrangement, treating Florence with the same respect they showed Vincent. When one new hire made the mistake of questioning Florence's instructions, Vincent's voice cut across the corral with quiet authority. "Miss Vaughn knows this land and these cattle better than anyone here. When she gives you direction, you follow it without question. Is that clear?" The man had mumbled an apology and never questioned Florence again. But it was not the big moments that affected Florence most deeply. It was the small ones. The way Vincent made sure she ate during long days when she would have worked through meals. The way he listened when she talked about her concerns for various cattle or pasture conditions. The way he asked her opinion on everything and genuinely considered her answers. The way he never tried to take over or diminish her role. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of separating cattle for market, they sat together on a ridge overlooking both ranches, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "This was a good idea," Florence said, "combining operations." "It was practical," Vincent agreed. "But I would be lying if I said practicality was my only motivation." Florence's heart beat faster. "What was your other motivation?" "I wanted to spend time with you. I wanted to see you in your element, doing what you do best." He turned to look at her. "I wanted to understand what drives you, what makes you choose this hard, lonely life over the conventional comforts of marriage." "It is not lonely," Florence said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "Is it not?" Vincent's voice was gentle. "Florence, I see you with your animals, your land, your work. You love what you do. But I also see you sometimes looking at families in town, at couples working together, and there is something in your eyes that looks like longing. You see too much, perhaps. Or perhaps you hide less than you think you do." He shifted to face her fully. "Can I tell you what I see? You do not have to agree or respond. I just want to say it once, and then I will leave it alone." Florence wanted to refuse, to tell him to keep his observations to himself. But she found herself nodding. "I see a woman who has been told her whole life that she has to choose between being herself and being loved. I see someone who has made the brave choice to be herself, but who has paid a price for that choice. I see strength and competence and fierce independence, but I also see loneliness that you will not admit to, because admitting it would feel like weakness." He paused. "And I see someone who deserves to have both, to be completely herself and completely loved for exactly who she is. Florence's throat was tight. That is not how the world works. It is not how the world usually works, Vincent corrected. But that does not mean it is impossible. My parents have it. I have seen other couples who have it. It is rare, but it exists. And you think you could offer me that? The words came out more sharply than Florence intended, defense against hope. I think I would like the chance to try, Vincent said simply. But I also understand if you do not want to take that risk. You have built something remarkable here, Florence. Your independence is not something to give up lightly. I am not asking you to give it up at all. I am just asking if you would consider the possibility that independence and partnership might not be mutually exclusive. Every man who has proposed to me has said something similar. They all promised partnership, but what they meant was help. They wanted to help me run my ranch, help me make decisions, help me manage my life. What they meant was take over. Then they were fools who did not see what they had. Vincent's voice was fierce. Florence, I do not want to run your ranch. I have my own. I do not want to make your decisions. You are better at that than I am. I do not want to manage your life. You are doing fine on your own. He took a breath. What I want is to stand beside you. To face the hard things together instead of separately. To celebrate the victories together. To build something that is ours while still maintaining what is mine and what is yours. I do not know if I can trust that. I know, and I am not asking you to decide anything now. I am just asking you to think about it, to consider that maybe, just maybe, you do not have to choose between being strong and being loved. The roundup finished in early November, and Vincent kept his word. He did not press Florence for an answer or even bring up the conversation again. They settled back into their separate routines, though Florence found herself missing the daily contact more than she wanted to admit. She thought constantly about what he had said. She watched couples in town with new eyes, trying to see if she could identify the kind of partnership Vincent described. She saw women who had disappeared into their marriages, becoming extensions of their husbands. But she also saw, when she looked carefully, a few couples who moved together like dancers, each supporting the other without either being diminished. In December, a fierce winter storm trapped Florence in town overnight after a supply run. The snow came up so fast that trying to drive home would have been suicidal, and she ended up taking a room at the boarding house along with several other stranded travelers. Vincent was among them, having been caught on his way back from Santa Fe. They shared supper in the boarding house dining room along with a dozen other people, but somehow ended up in the parlor afterward, just the two of them, while the others retired early or gathered around the piano in another room. "Are you warm enough?" Vincent asked. "I can build up the fire." "I am fine." Florence settled into a chair near the hearth. "How was Santa Fe? Profitable? I negotiated a good contract for spring delivery." He took the chair opposite her. "How is your herd handling the cold?" They talked about practical matters for a while, the conversation easy and comfortable. But then Vincent asked, "Have you thought about what I said?" Florence had known the question was coming eventually. "I have thought of little else. And I am terrified." The admission came out before she could stop it. "Every instinct I have tells me to protect what I have built, to not risk it. That is understandable. But there is another part of me, a part I have been trying to ignore, that wonders what it would be like. To have someone beside me instead of always facing everything alone." She met his eyes. "The problem is, I do not know how to be with someone without losing myself. I do not have any model for it. My mother died when I was young. Every marriage I have seen has involved the woman becoming smaller." Vincent leaned forward. "Then we would have to figure it out together. There is no rule book for the kind of partnership I am talking about, Florence. It would be new territory for both of us. You have your parents' example. As a template, yes, but every relationship is different. What worked for them might not work for us. We would have to build our own version. He paused. If you are willing to try. Florence was quiet for a long moment, listening to the wind howl outside and the crackle of the fire. She thought about her ranch, her hard-won independence, her carefully constructed life. She thought about the loneliness she would not admit to. She thought about Vincent's steady presence, his respect, his understanding. What would it look like? She asked finally. This partnership you are proposing, hope flared in Vincent's eyes, but his voice remained calm. What would you want it to look like? I want to keep running my ranch, making my own decisions about my land, my cattle, my business. Of course. I want to keep my own accounts, my own money. That makes sense. I want to be able to disagree with you without it becoming a battle for dominance. I would hope we would both want that. Florence took a breath. And I want to know that if I wake up one day and realize I cannot do this, that partnership feels like a cage, you will understand and not hate me for it. Vincent's expression grew serious. Florence, I cannot promise I would not be hurt, but I can promise I would understand. I would never try to trap you into something that makes you unhappy. The whole point is for both of us to be more ourselves, not less. That seems impossible. Maybe it is, Vincent admitted. Maybe I am naive to think we could make it work. But I would rather try and fail than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. He stood and moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hand carefully. Florence Vaughn, I am not asking you to marry me. Not yet. I am asking if you would be willing to consider the possibility. To spend time together intentionally, to see if we can build the kind of partnership we have both described. No commitments beyond that, just the willingness to try. Florence looked down at their joined hands. His was larger, roughened by work, warm and solid. She could pull away at any moment. He was not trapping her or demanding anything. He was simply offering. I am willing to try, she heard herself say, but slowly. I need time to trust this. The smile that broke across Vincent's face was radiant. We have all the time you need. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Florence had experienced with previous suitors. Vincent did not bring her flowers or jewelry or other conventional gifts. Instead, he brought her a book on new cattle breeding techniques being developed in Texas. He brought her information about a horse auction in Albuquerque. He brought her his honest thoughts and his steady presence. They spent time together working, because that was where they were both most comfortable. Vincent helped Florence repair her barn roof in January. Florence helped Vincent break a string of new horses in February. They took meals together sometimes, at one ranch or the other, always with Charlie or Maria or Vincent's hands present, maintaining propriety while building intimacy through conversation and shared experience. Florence found herself relaxing by degrees, lowering her guard in increments. Vincent never pushed for more than she was ready to give. When she drew boundaries, he respected them without complaint. When she shared pieces of her history, her fears about losing herself in marriage, he listened without trying to fix or dismiss her concerns. My father was a good man, Florence told him one evening in March as they sat on his porch, watching early stars emerge. But even he believed that ultimately, a woman needed a man to take care of things. He trained me because he had no sons, but he always assumed I would eventually marry and let a husband take over. When he was dying, he kept apologizing for leaving me alone. He did not see that being alone was your choice, Vincent observed. No, he loved me, but he could not imagine that I would want this life, that I would choose independence over security. Florence was quiet for a moment. Sometimes I wonder if there is something wrong with me. If I am deficient somehow for not wanting what other women seem to want. There is nothing wrong with you, Vincent said firmly. You are not deficient. You are just clear about who you are and what you need. That is not weakness, Florence. That is the opposite of weakness. Then why does it feel so lonely sometimes? Because humans are not meant to be completely alone. We need connection, community, love. But needing those things does not mean you have to give up yourself to get them. He turned to her. I need you to believe that. Not because I am trying to convince you to marry me, but because it is true. You can have both. You deserve both. In April, when spring roundup began, they worked their ranches together again, the arrangement so successful the previous fall that it seemed natural to continue it. But this time, there was an ease between them that went beyond professional cooperation. They moved through the work like two parts of a whole, each complementing the other's strengths. One afternoon, after successfully delivering a difficult calf, they sat together in the pasture, exhausted and exhilarated. The calf was nursing, the mother calm, the crisis averted. We make a good team, Vincent said. Florence smiled. We do. Florence. He turned to face her fully. I know I said I would give you all the time you needed, and I will. But I need you to know that my feelings have not changed. If anything, they have grown stronger. I love you. I love your strength, your intelligence, your unwillingness to compromise who you are. I love working beside you. I love talking with you. I love who I am when I am with you. Florence's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty and respect. I love that you can deliver a calf, negotiate a business deal, shoot a rifle, and run a ranch better than any man I have known, Vincent continued. But I also love the quiet moments, when you let your guard down and let me see the parts of yourself you keep hidden. The woman who loves the land with a fierce tenderness. The woman who takes care of her people with such loyalty. The woman who is brave enough to be completely herself even when the world tells her she should be different. Vincent. Florence's voice was unsteady. You do not have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. I love you, Florence Vaughn, and I want to spend my life standing beside you, not in front of you or behind you, but beside you, as your equal partner in everything. Florence felt tears threatening, which was ridiculous because she never cried. I do not know how to do this. Do what? Feel this way. I have spent so long protecting myself, being strong and independent and self-sufficient. I do not know how to let someone in without losing myself. Then we will figure it out together, Vincent said. And if you need to pull back sometimes to remember who you are on your own, I will understand. I am not trying to absorb you, Florence. I am trying to stand beside you. I know. Florence reached out and took his hand, the gesture still feeling new and brave. I think I am falling in love with you too. It terrifies me, but it is happening anyway. Love does not have to mean losing yourself. Prove it, Florence challenged. Marry me, Vincent Hollis, but on my terms. Keep your ranch, I will keep mine. We will work them together but maintain them separately. We will be partners but not possessions. We will build something new that does not require either of us to become less than we are. Vincent's eyes widened. Florence, are you proposing to me? I suppose I am. She felt a wild laugh bubbling up. Is that too independent? Should I have waited for you to ask? No. He pulled her close, his arms strong and warm around her. No, it is perfect. You are perfect. And yes, 1,000 times yes, I will marry you on your terms, on any terms that let me spend my life with you. He kissed her then, and Florence discovered that she could surrender to the moment without surrendering herself. She could be vulnerable without being weak. She could need someone without being diminished by that need. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Florence said, "We should talk about the practical aspects. Property rights, business arrangements, how we will manage 2 ranches." Vincent laughed. "Of course you want to negotiate the contract before the wedding. Is that wrong?" "No," he kissed her forehead. "It is very you, and I would not have it any other way." They spent the next several weeks working out the details with a lawyer in Raton. Florence insisted on a contract that kept their properties separate, their financial affairs distinct but coordinated. Vincent agreed to everything, adding only a clause that specified shared decision-making on any matter that affected both ranches. The lawyer, an older man who had handled Florence's father's will, looked at the document with bemusement. "This is the most unusual marriage contract I have ever drawn up." "Good," Florence said firmly. "Unusual is what we are aiming for." They were married in June of 1885 in a simple ceremony at the church in Raton. Florence wore a practical blue dress that she could wear again for town visits, and she carried wildflowers picked from the meadow between their ranches. Vincent wore his best suit, but Florence noticed with quiet pleasure that he had chosen to keep his work boots on, polished but unmistakably practical. Charlie gave Florence away, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. Maria stood as witness, beaming with satisfaction at having predicted this outcome. A surprising number of people from the community attended, their presence a testament to how much both Florence and Vincent were respected in the territory. The preacher, who had known Florence since birth, modified the traditional vows at her request. There was no promise to obey. Instead, they pledged to stand beside each other, to support without smothering, to love without limiting. When the preacher pronounced them married, Vincent kissed Florence with such tender passion that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. Florence kissed him back, uncaring of the public nature of the display because this was her choice, her life, her love. The reception was held at the Flying V, with tables set up in the yard and food provided by half the county. Vincent's parents had traveled from Colorado, and Florence found herself surprisingly nervous meeting them. "So you are the woman who captured our son's heart," Vincent's mother said, studying Florence with intelligent eyes that were the same gray-green as her son's. "I did not set out to capture anything," Florence said. "I was quite determined to remain unmarried." Vincent's mother laughed. "That is what makes you perfect for him. He does not need someone who will cling, he needs someone who will challenge him." She took Florence's hands. "My son tells me you are keeping your ranch separate, that you insisted on remaining independent. I hope that does not offend you." "Offend me?" "My dear girl, it delights me. I kept my property separate from my husband's as well. It is amazing how much more seriously men take your business opinions when they know you could survive perfectly well without them." Florence felt something relax in her chest. "Vincent said you were partners." "We are, but partnership does not mean losing yourself. It means finding someone strong enough to appreciate your strength." She squeezed Florence's hands. "Welcome to the family. I think you and I are going to be great friends." As the sun set and the party continued, Florence and Vincent slipped away to the ridge where he had first told her he loved her. They sat together, his arm around her shoulders, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Are you happy?" Vincent asked. Florence considered the question seriously. Happiness had never been her goal. Survival, success, independence, those had been her aims. But sitting here with this man who loved her without trying to change her, she realized she was happy, deeply, surprisingly, wonderfully happy. "I am," she said. "Are you?" "More than I knew was possible." He kissed her temple. "Thank you for taking the chance, for trusting me. Thank you for understanding what I needed, for not asking me to be smaller. I could never want you to be anything other than exactly who you are." They stayed on the ridge until the stars were bright overhead, talking about their plans for the combined ranches, for the future they would build together. Florence felt a peace she had never experienced before, the knowledge that she had found something rare and precious. A partnership that made her more herself, not less. A love that expanded rather than contracted her world. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Florence had lived alone for so long that sharing space, even with someone she loved, required conscious effort. Vincent moved into the Flying V house, though they maintained his house as well for when either of them needed solitude or when the work of one ranch required his closer presence. They developed rhythms and routines. Vincent rose early to make coffee. Florence handled the account books in the evenings. They worked their ranches during the day, sometimes together, sometimes separately, depending on the needs of each operation. They shared meals and decisions, and increasingly, the comfortable intimacy of two people learning to navigate life together. There were arguments. Florence had a temper when roused, and Vincent could be stubborn when he believed he was right. But they learned to fight fair, to listen even when angry, to remember that they were partners, not opponents. One particularly heated disagreement erupted in August over whether to sell a section of Flying V land to a neighboring rancher who needed access to water. Florence was adamantly opposed, seeing it as the beginning of losing her ranch piece by piece. Vincent argued that the money could be used to improve both their operations and that maintaining good relationships with neighbors was important. They argued for 2 days, neither willing to concede. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, Florence said, "This is exactly what I was afraid of, that being married would mean fighting over every decision." "We are not fighting over every decision," Vincent pointed out. "We are fighting over this decision, and that is healthy, Florence. Partners should be able to disagree. But how do we resolve it? You want one thing, I want another. Someone has to win and someone has to lose, or we find a third option." Vincent pulled out the maps of their combined properties. "What if we offered him water access through an easement instead of selling the land? He gets what he needs, you keep your property intact, we negotiate a fee for the access that gives us income without giving up assets." Florence studied the maps. "That could work." "It is your decision ultimately," Vincent said. "It is your land, I am just offering suggestions." "No." Florence looked up at him. "This is the partnership we agreed to. I need to hear your ideas even when they are different from mine. Especially then, I was wrong to shut you out." "You were not wrong to have strong feelings about your land, but I was wrong to assume that your different opinion meant you were trying to control me." Florence took his hand. "I am still learning how to do this, how to be married without losing myself. I will make mistakes. So will I." Vincent pulled her into his arms. "But we will figure it out together." They negotiated the easement with the neighbor, and it worked better than either of them had imagined. Other ranchers began approaching them about similar arrangements, and within a year, the water access fees had become a significant income stream for the Flying V. "You were right," Florence admitted one evening as they reviewed the accounts. "We were both right," Vincent corrected. "You were right that protecting your land was important. I was right that there were creative solutions. Together, we found something better than either of us would have managed alone." In the spring of 1886, Florence realized she was pregnant. She felt terror and joy in equal measure, uncertain how motherhood would affect her ability to run her ranch. She told Vincent while they were riding fence line, the words tumbling out awkwardly. He reined in his horse immediately, his face transforming with wonder. "A baby." "Florence, that is wonderful, is it?" Florence's voice shook. "How will I manage the ranch? How will I do everything I have been doing?" "The same way you do everything, with determination, intelligence, and help when you need it." Vincent rode closer, reaching across to take her hand. "Florence, having a child does not mean giving up who you are. My mother ran a ranch while raising 5 children. You will find a way. We will find a way together. What if I am terrible at it, at being a mother? You will not be. You are too strong and loving to be terrible at it." He smiled. "But even if you make mistakes, which all parents do, we will learn together." Florence gave birth in January of 1887 to a healthy boy with his father's gray-green eyes and his mother's determined chin. They named him Thomas Henry Hollis, and he was red-faced and loud and utterly perfect. Motherhood was harder than running a ranch and more wonderful than Florence had imagined. She had feared that she would lose herself in the demands of caring for an infant, but instead, she found new dimensions to her identity. She was still the rancher, still the businesswoman, still the independent spirit who had claimed her own life. But she was also a mother, fiercely protective and surprisingly tender. Vincent proved himself a devoted father, taking on his share of night feedings and diaper changes without complaint. When Thomas was 3 months old, and Florence was desperate to ride out and check on the spring calving, Vincent bundled up the baby and rode with her, the 3 of them moving across the land as a family unit. "This is what partnership looks like," Vincent said as they watched the new calves together. "Both of us making space for what matters to the other, both of us adjusting and adapting." Florence leaned against him, their son sleeping peacefully in Vincent's arms. "I was so afraid that marriage would make me smaller, but being with you, building this life with you, it has made me more myself, more capable, more complete." "That is how it is supposed to be," Vincent said softly. "Love should expand us, not diminish us." Over the next years, their lives settled into a rhythm that balanced work, family, and the ongoing negotiation of partnership. Florence and Vincent continued to run their ranches successfully, their combined operation becoming known throughout the territory for its innovation and fair dealing. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Sarah in 1889 and another son, Daniel, in 1891. Florence taught her children to ride and rope and handle cattle. Vincent taught them to read and write and think critically. Together, they taught them about partnership, about respecting strength in both men and women, about building a life that honored individual identity within the context of committed relationship. When Thomas was 10, he asked his mother why she and his father kept separate ranches when they were married. Florence considered the question carefully. "Because when your father and I married, I was afraid of losing myself. I had worked so hard to build something of my own, and I did not want to give it up. Keeping the ranches separate helped me remember that I was still myself, still capable, still independent." "But you are partners," Thomas said, confused. "We are, the best kind of partners." But partnership does not mean becoming the same person. It means 2 whole people choosing to build a life together while remaining themselves. She ruffled his hair. "When you grow up and find someone you want to spend your life with, remember that. Find someone who makes you more yourself, not less." In 1895, when Florence was 35 and Vincent was 37, they made the decision to officially combine the Flying V and the Double H into a single operation. It was a choice made from strength rather than necessity, a recognition that they had built something together that was greater than the sum of its parts. "Are you sure?" Vincent asked as they signed the papers. "I know how important the Flying V is to you." "It is important," Florence agreed. "It always will be, but so is what we have built together. This is not me giving up my independence, Vincent. This is me choosing to fully embrace our partnership. It feels significant. It is significant." Florence took his hand. "It is me finally trusting completely that loving you and being loved by you does not diminish me. It took me 11 years to get here, but I am here now." Vincent pulled her close, his eyes bright with emotion. "I would have waited another 11 years if that is what you needed. I know. That is why I finally feel safe enough to take this step." The combined ranch, which they named the Hollis Vaughn Ranch, became one of the most successful operations in northern New Mexico territory. But more than the financial success, it became known as a place where women were treated with the same respect as men, where innovation was encouraged, where families could work together without anyone being diminished. Florence and Vincent employed several women as ranch hands over the years, often women fleeing bad marriages or difficult circumstances. Florence made it clear that capability was the only requirement for employment, and she took quiet satisfaction in seeing these women discover their own strength. In 1900, when New Mexico was still years away from statehood, Florence attended a meeting in Santa Fe about women's suffrage. She had never considered herself a political person, but she found herself standing up to speak about her experience of building a life on her own terms. "I was told my whole life that a woman needed a man to be complete," she said to the assembled crowd. "I was told that independence and love were incompatible for a woman. I was told that I had to choose between being myself and being married." She paused. "I am here to tell you that those were lies. I run a successful ranch with my husband. We are equal partners in every sense of the word. I have not given up myself to be loved. I have been loved more fully because I refuse to give up myself." The speech was reprinted in several newspapers, and Florence found herself receiving letters from women across the territory and beyond. Women who felt trapped, women who felt diminished, women who were told they had to choose between independence and love. She answered every letter, sharing her story and encouraging these women to insist on partnerships that honored their whole selves. Some wrote back later with stories of finding or creating such partnerships. Others wrote to say they had chosen to remain unmarried rather than settle for less than they deserved. Florence respected both choices, understanding that the fundamental issue was about having the choice at all. As Florence and Vincent aged, they watched their children grow and begin to make their own choices. Thomas took to ranching with natural skill, but he also showed an interest in law and eventually left to attend college in the East. Sarah, their daughter, proved to have a gift for the business side of the operation, her mind sharp with numbers and negotiation. Daniel, their youngest, loved the land but in a different way, becoming interested in conservation and sustainable practices. "They are all so different," Vincent observed one evening as he and Florence sat on their porch, now in their late 50s, their hair graying, their hands weathered but still strong. "But they all know who they are. That is your doing, Florence." "Our doing," Florence corrected. "You taught them as much as I did about being true to themselves." "I suppose that is what partnership means," Vincent said. "Each of us contributing to something larger than ourselves without losing ourselves in the process." Florence leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that had become second nature over their decades together. "Do you remember when we first met? I was so determined to keep everyone at a distance. I remember thinking you were the most magnificent thing I had ever seen," Vincent said. "Standing there with your rifle, absolutely confident in yourself. I was terrified. You never showed it. I had too much practice at hiding it." Florence smiled. "You saw through my defenses anyway. I recognized someone fighting the same battles I was fighting. The need to prove ourselves, to build something of our own, to be valued for who we are rather than who people expect us to be." "We did it, though," Florence said. "We built something real, something lasting, something that did not require either of us to be less than we are." In 1906, when they had been married for 21 years, The Hollis Vaughn Ranch was recognized by the territorial government as one of the most successful operations in New Mexico. Both Florence and Vincent were invited to speak at agricultural conferences about their management practices, their partnership model, their success in combining two separate operations into a thriving whole. At one such conference, a young woman approached Florence during a break. "Mrs. Hollis, I heard your speech about partnership and independence. I am about to marry, and I am terrified of losing myself." Florence studied the young woman's face, seeing her own younger self in the fear and determination there. "Have you talked to your intended about your fears?" "He says he understands. He says he wants a partner, not a servant, but I hear that from other men too, and then after marriage everything changes." "Then you need to make sure it is written down," Florence said practically. "Draw up a contract. Specify what you want to keep separate, what you want to share, how you will make decisions. Make it legal and binding." "That is not very romantic." "Romance is wonderful," Florence agreed, "but partnership is practical. The romance sustains you through the daily work of building a life together, but the practical arrangements ensure that both of you have the freedom to be yourselves within that life." She touched the young woman's arm gently. "If he truly wants a partner, he will understand the need for clarity. If he balks at putting partnership in writing, then you know he does not really mean it." The young woman's face cleared. "That makes sense. Thank you, Mrs. Hollis." After the conference, as they drove back to the ranch, Vincent asked, "What did that young woman want?" Florence told him, and Vincent smiled. "You are changing the world, one conversation at a time." "I am just telling people what you taught me," Florence said. "That love does not have to come at the cost of self. That partnership can mean standing beside someone rather than behind them." "We taught each other that," Vincent corrected. "I came to you with theories. You made them reality by being brave enough to try." When they reached home, their children were waiting with news. Thomas, now a practicing lawyer in Santa Fe, had proposed to a woman he had met at the courthouse. Sarah, who had taken over much of the daily management of the ranch, was courting a schoolteacher from Raton. Daniel, their youngest, had been accepted to an agricultural college in Colorado. As their children shared their news, their plans, their dreams, Florence felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not just for the ranch they had built or the wealth they had accumulated, but for these three confident adults who knew their own worth and refused to settle for less than they deserved. Later, after the children had left and the house was quiet, Vincent found Florence on the porch, her favorite place for reflection. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Everything," Florence said. "How far we have come, how much has changed. How grateful I am." "Grateful that you saw me," Florence said softly. "Really saw me. Not a woman who needed to be taken care of or controlled or convinced to be someone different. You saw exactly who I was and admired my strength instead of being threatened by it." "How could I be threatened by the thing that made you magnificent?" Florence turned to look at him. This man who had stood beside her for more than 2 decades, who had kept his promise to never make her smaller, who had built a life with her instead of building a life for her. "I love you," she said. "I probably do not say it enough, but I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I know," Vincent said, taking her hand. "You show me every day, in the way you trust me with your thoughts, in the way you let me stand beside you, in the way you built this life with me instead of just existing beside me." He brought her hand to his lips. "You took a chance on partnership when everything in your experience told you not to. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They sat together as the sun set, as they had done thousands of times before. Two whole people who had chosen to build a life together without either being diminished. The land around them was theirs. Not because Florence had given up her ranch or because Vincent had absorbed hers, but because they had created something new and stronger together. Thomas's wedding the following spring was a joyful affair, and Florence was pleased to note that his bride was a sharp-eyed young woman who negotiated her own marriage contract before the ceremony. Sarah married her schoolteacher the year after, in a ceremony that honored both their professions and their commitment to equality. Daniel, upon finishing college, chose to return to the ranch, bringing new ideas about land management that honored both productivity and conservation. By 1910, Florence and Vincent were grandparents several times over, and the Hollis Vaughn Ranch had become a model not just for agricultural success, but for partnership in an era when such partnerships were still rare. Young couples came from across New Mexico and beyond to ask advice on how to build marriages that honored both individuals. Florence, now 50 years old and still riding out to check on cattle despite her children's protests, had become something of a legend. The woman who had refused marriage proposals from the richest men in the territory. The woman who had built her own success. The woman who had found a way to be fully herself and fully partnered. But it was in the quiet moments, in the rhythm of daily life, that Florence felt most successful. When she and Vincent worked side by side, moving through tasks with the ease of decades of partnership. When they disagreed and worked through the disagreement with respect and eventually compromise. When they sat together in companionable silence, needing no words because they knew each other so completely. One afternoon in late summer, as they rode together across land that bore both their names, Vincent said, "If you could go back and talk to that young woman on the porch in Raton, the one who was so determined to stay unmarried, what would you tell her?" Florence considered the question as they rode. "I would tell her that she was right to be cautious, that her instincts to protect herself were valid, that independence is precious and should not be given up lightly. But I would also tell her that the right kind of love makes you more, not less. That partnership with someone who truly sees you and values your strength is not a cage but a foundation from which to soar higher." Florence smiled. "And I would tell her that she is about to meet a cowboy who will change everything she thinks she knows about what marriage can be." Vincent reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "And I would tell the young man that he is about to meet a woman who will teach him what true strength looks like, who will challenge everything he thinks he knows about love and partnership, who will make him better in every way." "We did well, did we not?" Florence said. "Building this life together." "We did more than well," Vincent said. "We created something rare and precious. We proved that love and independence are not opposites. That partnership can mean standing beside someone as an equal, that marriage can be about addition rather than subtraction." They rode on in comfortable silence. Two people who had chosen each other, who had fought for the kind of relationship that honored both of them, who had built a legacy of partnership that would ripple through generations. As the years passed, Florence and Vincent grew older together, their hair turning white, their steps slowing but their minds remaining sharp. They passed more of the ranch responsibilities to their children and grandchildren, but they remained involved, their opinions sought and valued. In 1920, when women finally gained the right to vote in national elections, Florence cast her ballot with profound satisfaction. She thought about all the women who had written to her over the years, seeking advice on how to claim their own lives. She thought about her daughters and granddaughters, growing up in a world that was slowly beginning to recognize women's full humanity. "That evening," she told Vincent, "when I was young, I thought I had to choose between being myself and being loved. I am grateful beyond words that you proved me wrong, that you showed me a different way. We showed each other, Vincent said, as he always did when she gave him too much credit. I brought the theory, but you brought the courage to live it. In 1925, when Florence was 65 and Vincent was 67, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a large gathering of children, grandchildren, friends, and community members. The celebration was held at the ranch, and people came from across New Mexico to honor the couple who had built not just a successful operation, but a model of partnership that had influenced countless other relationships. Thomas, their eldest son and now a respected judge, gave a toast. My parents taught me many things. They taught me about hard work, about integrity, about respect for the land. But the most important thing they taught me was about partnership. They showed me that two people can build a life together without either one being diminished. That love means supporting each other's strength, not exploiting each other's weakness. That marriage can be the foundation for both people to become more fully themselves. Sarah spoke next, her voice strong and clear. My mother once told me that she was terrified of losing herself in marriage. But what she discovered, and what she taught me, was that the right kind of marriage does not require you to lose yourself. It gives you a partner to stand beside you as you become more fully who you are meant to be. Daniel, their youngest, added, My father told me once that the best thing he ever did was ask my mother to let him stand beside her instead of in front of her or behind her. He said that true partnership means respecting the other person enough to let them be fully themselves. I have tried to build my own marriage on that principle, and it has made all the difference. As Florence listened to her children speak, she felt Vincent's hand close around hers, warm and familiar and solid. She turned to look at him and found him watching her with the same admiration she had seen in his eyes that first day in Raton, when she had been standing on the porch with her rifle, determined to need no one. No regrets? He asked softly. None, she said firmly. You kept your promise, Vincent Hollis. You stood beside me. You never tried to make me smaller or take over my life. You loved me without limiting me. That was easy, Vincent said. You made it easy by being exactly who you are, by refusing to compromise your core self, by being brave enough to build a partnership that honored both of us. They kissed then, to the cheers and applause of their gathered family and friends, two people who had chosen each other 40 years ago and had chosen each other every day since. Florence and Vincent lived into their 80s, remaining active and engaged with the ranch and their growing family. They watched their grandchildren marry and begin having children of their own. They saw the world change around them, saw women gaining more rights and opportunities, saw the old rigid models of marriage beginning to crack and shift. In their final years, when age finally slowed them down, they spent long hours on their porch, watching the land they had worked together, talking about their life and their choices. If you had it to do over, Vincent asked one evening, would you change anything? Florence was quiet for a long moment, considering. I might have been less afraid at the beginning, less guarded, but then again the caution was what protected me until I found you. So no, I would not change anything. Every choice, every fear, every moment of courage led me here. To this life we built together. To these children and grandchildren who know what partnership really means. To 48 years of standing beside the best man I have ever known. 48 years of standing beside the strongest woman I have ever known, Vincent countered. You changed my life, Florence. You taught me what true strength looks like, what courage means, what love can be when both people are brave enough to be vulnerable without being diminished. Florence leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that had never lost its comfort in all their years together. We did something rare, did we not? We did something almost miraculous, Vincent agreed. We built a partnership that made us both more than we would have been alone. We created a love that expanded rather than contracted our worlds. We proved that independence and intimacy are not opposites, but complements. Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep in early 1930, at the age of 72. Florence held his hand through his final breaths, telling him about their life together, thanking him for seeing her, for loving her, for standing beside her through nearly 45 years of marriage. After his death, Florence continued to live on the ranch for several more years, still riding out to check on the cattle when she could, still managing the business side of the operation with her children. She found that widowhood was different from the independence she had known before marriage. She was alone now, but not in the way she had been before Vincent. She had been changed by their partnership, expanded by their love, strengthened by having someone who truly saw her and valued her completely. She died in 1934 at the age of 74, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her last words were about Vincent, about how he had kept his promise to stand beside her, to never make her smaller, to love her without limiting her. At her funeral, Thomas read a letter she had left for her descendants. "I was too independent for the kind of marriage that was offered to me when I was young, the kind that would have required me to become less than I was, but I was not too independent for true partnership. I want all of you to remember that. Do not settle for relationships that make you smaller. Wait for someone who admires your strength and asks to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you. Wait for someone who understands that love means supporting each other in becoming more fully yourselves. That kind of partnership is rare, but it is possible. Your grandfather and I proved that. And the life we built together, the family we created, is proof that independence and love are not opposites. They are two sides of the same precious coin." The Hollis Vaughn Ranch continued for generations, passed down through children and grandchildren who had learned from Florence and Vincent what true partnership meant. The story of the woman who was too independent for marriage, but who found a cowboy who admired her strength and asked to stand beside her became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder that love does not have to come at the cost of self, that two people can build a life together without either being diminished. And in Raton, New Mexico, where Florence had once stood on a porch with a rifle, determined to need no one, people still told stories about the remarkable woman who had shown them all what strength really meant, and the wise cowboy who had loved her, not despite that strength, but because of it.